I'm driving. Usually I've flown on the past when it's just me, but my husband and my son are going to.
You're flying to Dallas? I'm driving. You flying?
I am. I hate flying, but I'm going to do it because I have a class that afternoon at 2 p.m. so I can be there. And I'm not going to fight traffic if I can't even get out of my house.
You're not making it to Dallas.
That's right.
I'm driving.
Stand for
That's
your
flying.
There you go.
I'm gonna help Stephanie fly back home.
Thank you. I thought about it. I woke up in the middle of the night going, oh my God, I'm flying by myself. I have to change my flight.
She's gotta go earlier.
I have a class at 2.
She's a newer board member.
They
Yeah.
changed, they moved ours, but she's even earlier than us.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So by myself.
That's on Thursday? Okay, I'll figure it out, because we might be driving up early.
We're good.
We are now back in open session. The time is now 6:44. No action decision was made while in closed session. And we left off at the item for the vote for that Ms. Canoyer put forward to keep the closed session item in open session. So that was motioned and the second was made by Ms. Ryan. So at this point, I'll ask by show of hands, all those in favor, raise your hand. Any opposed? Okay. So now we can move forward with this item in open session. Thanks for your feedback in closed session for this item, and I think we're clear to go. So just a little brief history. This is the first time we've had 7 board members since Ms. King had resigned. We were trying to get to potentially having this discussion in June, but it was very hectic with compensation and other discussions that it made it very challenging. So we get to August, we finally find a board member to place in Ms. King's spot, and now here we are in the beginning of September. So we have to do a few things. One of them is establish our timeline for the summative, but also for the formative portion of the evaluation. We also have to determine what instrument, if we're going to utilize the same one, or if we're going to modify, adjust, or use something totally different. And then obviously we need to also now affirm, once that's been done, what, if any, are we looking to possibly consider modifying or adding to superintendent goals as well as we move forward. One thing that I know that Dr. Fields has mentioned, and I'll say on record, is that we are delayed in receiving information from the TEA regarding taper data. So there is sort of a lapse now. In the past, we would have had this data, we could have made some assessments. That's okay, because since we've not had this discussion with a new superintendent, and we haven't had this discussion with 3 new board members, it's time that we have this discussion on how we're going to have this instrument move forward so that we are evaluating Dr. Fields in the best way possible. So all of this part of the discussion is definitely open session. And so just wanted to kind of set that parameter, that framework. So today I do not anticipate us taking any formal action on anything yet because we're at the ground level, but also for the community to know the action item is there just in case we decide we want to take action, we have the flexibility to do so. So those always set us up for success and ensure that we have a win-win out of this entire meeting. So going forward, I guess the first place to start would be to look at what the previous board goals were in terms of where we left off with Dr. Ball. They were district goals, they were board goals, and I wanted to get some feedback because there are 2 different manners in which we can evaluate a superintendent. One is a student outcome based, which is similar to what our board goals look like. But then we could also create our own format, our own instrument, our own goal. So we have two different options to talk through. So I guess most importantly, we have an instrument now. So I wanted to talk about the instrument and that process first. So if I could open up the floor to any initial questions or feedback. Ms. Blair.
So I actually don't think that that's an appropriate instrument for a brand new superintendent. It was designed for a superintendent who had experience, that had already had experience with managing the entire district, and we're not in that position now. So what I would like to recommend is that we move back to the TASB official superintendent evaluation. It includes those the same goals, and the student performance goals. That's a section there. But then we can also add in the other areas that a new superintendent would need to be aware of as you move forward. So that was my suggestion and what I came prepared to discuss.
Okay, well, thank you. I'll move on to Ms. Ryan.
Yes, I did 7 hours of CE this weekend on superintendent evaluation. Thank you, Tasby. And so a lot of great information out of there because things have changed over the last 5 years and the commissioner's rules and a lot of that has changed. And so I went over the TASB with, format that came from, the commissioner's recommended template. And I really like this because it has those 3 parts. It focuses on that student performance, which is, strictly taper data. And all those student outcome goals that we have are directly related to that part 1. But then that part 2, with those performance goals each year, allows us to focus on, help the superintendent focus on what the priorities are for the next 12 to 15 months. Whether that's enrollment, facilities, fiscal, pick a category, any category that we feel is most important because there's 100 things you can do. Trying to laser focus that down each year into what's most important to the board and the district is helpful. And then also just having that part 3 is those assessment of ongoing responsibilities that goes into the educational leadership, district management, which has facilities, fiscal and human resources, and then the board and community relations. A lot of these things in here really touched on what was in that superintendent profile, which was an engaged leader and out in the community and fiscal responsibility and transparency. So many of those were listed in this document, in this template, that it really seemed to speak to some of the things that I think we're kind of looking for. And I think it creates a kind of a well-rounded superintendent because it hits not just academic. There's a lot more to running a school district than a STAR score. And so I really like this document. It seems easy to use as a new board member, and hopefully it will be easy for a new superintendent to use too.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez, do you have any commentary?
So I'm looking at the TASB one right now, and I think I don't have an objection to this, although I think the student or the superintendent performance goals, so there's like the student performance is like student academic data, that's the beginning, and then there's superintendent performance goal, which is kind of a fill in the blank. I would be fine with that if we kept the superintendent's constraints that we had laid out as a board previously. Okay, so we're not like willy-nilly adding stuff or, changing course or something like that. That feels fine. I think in my past experience with the other ones that when we get into the, I'm reading them now, instructional management, student services management, staff development, and professional growth. I think it would be really important to have like a very narrow definition of like what we're looking for in those, because what I don't want to happen is when it comes time to evaluate the superintendent, that we're getting this binder that's like 500 pages because the superintendent feels like they need to prove themselves, right? And I'm not talking about Dr. Fields or any superintendent in that situation. If we're not saying, here's what we're looking for, or that like, is it the superintendent's job to say, well, these are the goals that we've set as a department in this, and here's where we stand against those? Or is that something where the board is dictating it? I want to get really clear on that before we just adopted the instrument. But like, I think that in experiencing the one that we used previously, I really liked the very clear-cut focus on student outcomes. That was super simple. When it came time to evaluate it, we knew exactly where we stood because like over the course of a year, we'd had presentations every month on those different things. And so when it came time to evaluate, like it was a surprise to nobody what that was going to look like. And so I think that's where my only caution in using the TASB instrument would be to like make sure that we're setting up this in the same way.
My intent would be to make them all SMART goals, which then, has that measurable, achievable, time-bound kind of thing. And if required, develop a rubric to go with it. Should there, depending on what the goal and the will of the other board members is.
And then it's on the monitoring calendar.
Right.
And then if we're doing quarterly formatives where we're talking about this stuff every 3 months, then it hopefully isn't a giant binder at the end of 12 months. It's stuff we've been talking about all year. We talk about it.
And I would maybe argue that like we should, as much as possible, use our existing goals to drive this. So it's not like 5 million additional reports that are coming on the monitoring calendar because it's our monitoring calendar is pretty comprehensive already. There may be some holes here like on, let me see. Honestly, I think if we mapped them to the things, I think the only thing that might not be included is the fiscal management piece. I think everything else maps to these pieces. The existing things we have, the constraints and the goals already map to those.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Ms. Eaton, do you have any feedback?
Well, I went over our existing goals, and had I known that, we were going to be discussing possibly changing it, then I would have looked at the one from TASB. So I'll look at it when I go home. But from what I've heard so far, what Ms. Canoia said makes sense, that we can utilize both of them and make sure that we keep the constraints, set. Let the constraints remain the way they are. There's already a fix to our goals. So if we do it that way, I think it makes perfect sense.
Thank you, Ms. Eaton. Ms. Stanford?
My main concern is just making sure that the academic performance is still the highest priority. I know there's other things that are needed in running the district, but to me, this is why the district exists to begin with. So, and I'm also wanting to be open to maybe tweaking the current academic goals when we can. And not just leaving them as they are. I'd like to know that we can be open to reconsidering the other results.
So, my thought is that I've done this evaluation for several superintendents. We've done sort of the TASB model. We did this newest one that we did last for Dr. Ball. And they're all, as long as they're SMART goals, as mentioned, they can be evaluated and they're effective. I will tell you the only thing that concerned me with this previous set of goals were that they didn't broaden beyond student goals. There was more need to focus on other aspects of what the board has oversight and we charge with our superintendent to do. So I'm absolutely agreeable to either modifying this instrument or going with the one that you guys have looked at. I haven't looked at the one in TASB, but I'm sure I've seen that format. So bottom line is, it looks like we're all in a good area. So this is important because we make sure we know what instrument we want to use. The TASB model is there. They do a lot of our work for us, so we don't have to reinvent. I'll look at it a little bit. But I can agree with that, just because, again, I did feel the previous one was just a little too restrictive to only student outcomes, which is greatly important, but it's not the only thing that's important. So it looks like we have consensus that we have, thank you, Ms. Ryan. We have an idea of where we're headed to. And Ms. Faulkner, I know that you still have to go through the training, so please, forgive that I will ask and still call upon you, but I still would love to have your input.
Well,
What do you have?
So I figured out I couldn't get on TASB, so I had to finagle my way just through their website and kind of generically look. We're still waiting on a phone call from them to figure out why I can't get it. But just generically, in looking at the goals here, yes, student achievement drives everything. But if we don't have teachers, if we don't have facilities, if we don't have employees, if we don't have continuing growth of our educators in as far as staff development, then the district really, it's not, all of those are building blocks to get to this right here. So in my mind, I kind of see a stair step. You have the superintendent, so he's got to have the biggest shoulders and he's got to be able to just handle everything as far as the district goes. Then we create those district goals that feed into what is expected. And then the campuses should feed into what we are expecting of the district and so on. So it's a stair step. But essentially, none of this can happen if we don't monitor our bonds, if we don't monitor the lack of staff, if we don't look out the air conditioning going out and we can't have kids in the classroom and they're moving back and forth. So really, what's in existence it needs to be expanded, in my opinion. It really does.
And I appreciate you bringing that because obviously there have been some questions about bonds and its management, and all of that feeds into ensuring that we're looking at all aspects. One thing that we've seen in previous superintendent evaluations is community outreach, visibility. We have to also measure that too. In previous superintendents, that was also measured. So we were able to say, okay, have you been out? What have you been doing? That kind of thing that I think was not part of this previous assessments. So it's traditional, but I think it works. And if we are comfortable, then we'll move forward with the TASB model as we revise our approach to it, using the core of the student outcomes that were adopted. And mind you, there were 4 of us that worked through that on this board. There was a lot of work that went into it.
It was
good
a
work.
year of
Yes.
work. Yeah.
A lot of work. So
Not a
Mary's on
one-off
there
workshot.
I remember.
I want to make
throw the
sure.
baby out of the bathwater.
Exactly. So I want to make sure we still value that very intense time where the 4 of us that were on the board at the time really put in the effort. I think they're solid, and they definitely deserve to be part of the core of what we're doing. But adding to it, then you guys have solved the modification question. What additional aspects will we add? That sounds fair enough and I think appropriate enough. So we'll go ahead and shelve that discussion for a second and we'll move forward unless there are any final questions regarding the instrument.
This is kind of regarding the instrument. Knowing how long it took us to get to the point of the goals that we have, and knowing that we do have 3 brand new board members who've never evaluated a superintendent before, I would suggest that when we get to the point of if we're going to modify any part of the goals, that we do that with an outside facilitator, because then it can serve the dual purpose of like a training, and helping us, because my fear in this TASB instrument is that it steps over the line from governance into administration unless we have somebody facilitating that process for us and can help us stay at the altitude that the board should be at rather than like micromanaging. Because I think like that's my only hesitation with this instrument, and I don't think it's the fault of the instrument. I think the instrument is helping us see like here are all the aspects, but left to our own devices, I think we could perhaps cross that line, or it would be hard to monitor ourselves, and it's helpful to have a facilitator be able to help.
Did y'all have one before?
Yes.
But I think that's where timeline comes in too, is like, there's a process that could be gone through, with the new group of 7 And the problem is kids already took the STAR test, so like the train has already left the station. Like, and so we have an instrument that's been in effect since last November when you all approved it. So, and we're gonna get a taper report here this November. So like the ship's already sailed, so timeline wise, where are we within the superintendent evaluation timeline and where is the smart place to be that sets us up for long-term evaluations? You know where I'm going, Ms. Macias, right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
we will be talking timeline. Let me just address that point that Ms. Rodriguez made about the facilitator, and then we will also go into timelines, because that's part of this discussion. We need to kind of set the roadmap.
Yeah.
So, in terms of the facilitator, I agree, and I intended to find one to kind of help flesh this next level out. This was the initial one. We didn't need one for right now. We certainly will need one if we start looking further and deeper into this process, especially with 3 new board members. I do recognize that. So I can say that we will add that element, and if there's no negative on that, we'll just move forward with adding that and getting training for that. So that being said, that kind of does close at least for the time being, the instrument aspect, which was a very important question to ask all of us. The next one would be absolutely discussing the timeline. And then, of course, we'll move into goals, because I want to talk a little bit about that too.
That's what I was trying to go to, when do we implement a new instrument? That's where I was going.
And that's where the timeline question, because we have other aspects to consider in the timeline as well. But the timeline is definitely one of those elements that we need to consider. So we are, just finished Labor Day weekend. We're in September. So we have a time frame in which we have traditionally evaluated our superintendents, which has been November, December, January, within that range. It fits well with paper data coming in and us giving a summative eval. If we look at where we are now, we know we'll need another meeting, maybe 2 at most, to finalize everything. So if we schedule a meeting, and let's just say worst case, early October, just worst case, we can actually set then the next level of expectations in October. And this is brainstorming, so just work with me on this. So when we have the October meeting, we can actually then be in position to have an instrument adopted, maybe refine goals, add some additional ones, all of those things that I would expect. And so that we would be then in position to provide the initial summative evaluation in November, December, or January, staying within compliance, but also in a position to speak with Dr. Fields.
Summative?
It would be summative. Your formative would be in June.
Yeah.
That's, again, I haven't got there yet, but let me just put the timeline out there. So the summative would still be within that period of time, so that we're actually evaluating them close to where the student data is. By the time you get to a June time, if you did a summative, all the information's already been gone. It's last year, and it just makes better sense to have it closer to when we see the data to kind of reflect on it. In June, it could be formative, and that would be my recommendation, that we target the month of June or July, depending on how many compensation meetings we have or whatnot. June or July seems to be the best window for formative. If we decide today that we want to have quarterly formative evaluations, well, that changes it. We'll have one in April, we'll have one in July, because we want our superintendent to be successful. So the more information he hears from us, the better he will be prepared to be successful. So I'm okay with all of that, but I certainly want to put that out there for the framework of this conversation, so we can get input on what we feel is effective. Ms. Rodriguez?
So a suggestion I have is I agree that sometime in the November to January timeline is the best time to have the superintendent's evaluation in general, because it coincides with the release of the taper report and all that official data. And I would suggest that we consider this year a baseline year, because that data was became real data almost around the time that our superintendent became the superintendent. So I wouldn't want to hold somebody responsible for data that they were not the leader in charge. And so that's the baseline. And then in January of 2025 would be a summative evaluation.
The real thing.
Yeah. And for formative pieces, I think it makes sense at the 6-month mark to do a more like comprehensive formative evaluation, and that we use our monthly monitoring reports as ongoing opportunities for feedback. And if that then needs to be like a standing closed session item, because that would be like feedback to the superintendent would be in closed session, if we could consider adding that as like a follow-up to our monthly reports. And if we need to adjust the monitoring calendar based on like whatever goals we might add or things like that, we could make some small adjustments, although I know what a task it was to create it in the first place, that monitoring calendar, but I do think there are some pieces that could be added to it. That would be my suggestion.
Is there any other comments? Ms. Wright?
Yeah, I guess that's where I was kind of going with the timeline, because, you know, the new commissioner's rules, the taper has to be the source document. We don't get to go off preliminary STAR and BOIM, we don't get to use any of, we're not allowed to use any of that in your evaluation report. So if we wait till next May or June, we're still using November's. So why not reset the clock earlier? You know, the data is what it is, the train is already set, you know, we've already got an instrument, it for whatever, you know, it's worth, it's what we have. You know, it also helps stay within that whole spirit of the law, 15 months, interim acting, you know, superintendent, you know, TASB recommends we just kind of just close that thing out and move on, you know, then move along, you know, from the time you got to be interim. And I think that gives us time to get a consultant in here and really, you know, over the month of October and November, and let's get this done. And I prefer earlier in the November, December, January timeframe, only because it then gives you from November to May to actually go do the things that we're gonna ask you to do and hold those. Like when you don't do it till like the end of January, it's like, well, the kids are taking the test in April. So like the train is halfway sailed already. So getting that as early in a school year process as you can maximizes your time to go do all of the things that we're kind of expecting you to do. So it'd be really nice to like close this thing out in November, be done with this year, and with probably just with the instrument we have, it is what it is at this point. Like, are we gonna change it and then evaluate you in November? It's already September, like that doesn't, none of it seems fair your first, you know, 4 or 5 months.
You make a good point. My initial thought process behind that is that the sooner that we can give Dr. Fields a glimpse of what that instrument will really look like, he can actually then build on that.
Yeah.
And so I would ideally like to have that instrument complete initially from this go round, be what his summative looks like, even though there'll be elements that he's still building out, because we have to kind of set what, if, like I mentioned earlier about communicating with the communication in the community, what would that look like? He has to help set that. We all have to talk about those things. So,
well, I think we could use a new instrument with the same goals, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then not make changes. So if we did make changes to the goals, especially if there were substantive changes, I would advocate that those would go into effect for the 24-25 school year. Does that make sense? Like if we're making, like our goals stand for this school year because the school year has started. And so then if we go through like a goal setting process that they get codified in the instrument, but we can use this new instrument with our existing goals.
Ms. Eden, did you have any comment? No. Ms. Stephanie?
So I don't know the monthly assessment tool, I haven't seen that, but would that be like having a quarterly but just more frequent? Is that what the monthly is like?
We haven't had a monthly assessment instrument. We've had a report. So the monthly reports that we have in our regular board meetings are the data that we use to evaluate the superintendent. But we haven't in the past then
You're
turned
talking
around.
monitoring
and
calendar,
the
right?
Monitoring
Yeah.
calendar, and what we'll do is each month we'll come through and speak about the group.
Can I show it to her?
Yes.
And over the course of a year, we see everything,
Correct.
Mhm.
just different, it's a
It's
different
not the same
topic
thing
every month.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Because I did like the idea of the quarterly, especially for a new,
The quarterly sit down.
Mhm.
yes.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's informal or
And-
if quarterly they're formal and
Mhm.
every 6 months they're a little more formalish.
Yeah.
Okay, Dr. Fields? What did you say?
I was just gonna say, I like the idea of, the feedback in closed session, even after we go through the monthly. Delivery of what we see here, so I'm good with quarterly or in closed session monthly. The more information, the better. And I love the idea of going to the task evaluation.
Ms. Knoyer?
But I also think that there may be some other things we want to add to this that aren't part of the goals that we already
Right.
have. And the quarterly would be an appropriate time for those to be discussed. So it may be that we have a closed session monthly after whatever that is, just to talk about that in closed session. And then we also, in the quarter, we have a superintendent's evaluation discussion that ropes all that other stuff in. Because some of
So
it, I'm
the
not sure.
The
is
newer
need-
goals you're saying. if
Yeah.
we
May not
adopted
need, may not be
something, yeah.
part of that monitoring calendar. Some of it
Right.
may, right, you know.
If
Some
we
might
needed-
be.
We could add it to the
Right.
monitoring calendar, yeah.
So we just gonna do like a summary at the end of the quarter on what we had discussed during the.
That, and maybe if there's something else that we didn't have a report on that we want to talk about.
Like if we have something like economizing the resources of the district to spend more money on instruction. Like, let's say we decided that was a new goal. That may not be something that's has a monthly
A way to
report or is on a
monitor.
monitoring, but it may be something at our quarterly that we sit down and be like, hey, where are we at on what economy things have you done? You know, oh, we've
And that would
turned
come
half
out
the lights
during,
off and we
that would come out during
put in
budget.
eco
This
gas
is
and
a
like.
perfect time to talk about.
Yeah,
that.
for those
So,
more
you know.
qualitative type things that may meet some of the more qualitative, and quantitative goals.
I'd like to get some feedback from Ms. Faulkner, if she has anything to share.
I disagree with waiting until 25 because that's too long. I kind of agree, I mean, it's kind of a blend. If these are the goals that we have and the scores are coming out, let's close it out and let's start
Yeah.
new because, and let's start moving with it because I really don't think, and again, I'm gonna speak to special ed, I don't think our special ed kids at Kirby Middle School who are lacking 7 sped teachers right now can wait until 25.
And yeah, and I think what I'm saying is like, I actually have a lot of confidence that like the board goals that we have are mostly right. And I think like, I don't wanna be in a place where we're throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
And if we are going to make substantive changes to those things, that's where we are. Because I don't think, I mean, let's be honest, I don't think we're gonna meet our targets
No.
this year. And so that might be a place where we're saying, okay, we're gonna keep the targets that we had intended for 23, 24, because those are pretty aspirational, right, given our current context. And that if we are making changes, that would happen for 24, 25, after we've had a full cycle of Dr. Fields leading the district.
In my mind, keeping these is the right thing to do.
Yes, yeah.
But what I'm saying is add additional expectations.
Yeah, no, I think we could do that, yes.
Before the end of the school year,
Yeah.
at this point, and then with the feedback monthly. I mean, because already there's so many questions that are not addressed in these goals.
Mhm.
And I think the only way, as a teacher, that I know how to do that is data driven. Here's the data
Yes.
that I have, here's what I've been presented, and that's, I think that's the way we need to cover ourselves, is create something that we can get the feedback so that when questions are asked, we can say, here's the data, here's who you call if you don't like my answer.
And I think, and thank you for giving me the chance to like clarify my thinking there, because I think because the January, because it happens in January based on a report that comes out in November, based on data that happened in May, we won't have the formal evaluation until then. But I'm totally in agreement that we could add some things, but I personally don't think we should substantially change our targets in the academic sense until we've gotten around of like, this year's a baseline, and then we see where we go from there.
Well, we will be transitioning here in just a second with goals. We're gonna talk a little bit about these things, look at the current ones and discuss the possibility of adding more. But I do want to close the timeline out because that's an important part of it. So I don't hear any disagreement with the summative timeline of November through January. I sense that we're all okay with that timeline. I also sense that there is a need to do quarterly formative conversation with Dr. Field, which means our first formative then would be in April. We'll have our summative, again, anywhere between November, December, or January, but the formative would be in April, and then it would be in June, July, and then we would have it again maybe in October. If we're looking at that going up until his next one in January of
Can
25.
we narrow November, December, January? That's 3 different months. Can we narrow that down to one of those?
I would say December in the middle. So, but.
When does the taper report come out?
It's usually come out in November, but the last couple of years it's come out in December. This last one was December 15th, I believe.
And they keep changing it too.
So maybe
Yeah, that's right,
January
before
is
January
our
is gonna have to be it.
It's usually done right before the winter break, which gives us time.
So, all right, if we have to look at that, because I was hopeful we'd get it out sooner, but it has been later and later.
Yeah, because they've been
We still haven't received
Okay.
falling back.
preliminary results.
So,
Yeah.
so,
But Mr. Vasile, so are you saying we're gonna go change the current instrument for this year, even though the kids already took the test? Like, is that what you're saying? Or we're gonna
we're going
go through
to,
the process this fall to set a new instrument for January?
I'd like to look at the possibility of adjusting our instrument, incorporating the same information that we have from the previous one, and start looking at that in the conversation in beginning of October. Because we're gonna have to have another meeting to discuss the specifics of that instrument. And then, of course,
Or
once
we're
we,
gonna hire a consultant to do that?
and we will.
Okay.
Yeah, and then once we've done that, then we'll affirm that we're comfortable all the way around with this instrument, and it'll be ready and live to go in November. Now that we know we're probably not gonna have data in just, may say, January, let's call that summative,
Official.
yeah, summative evaluation in January. So we have time in October, November to still kind of, solidify what we need for our instrument and our goals, and still be in time to provide a summative evaluation in January. And that's what I'm suggesting.
I guess I just don't like dumping a new tool on them in November and be like, you're getting graded in January. Like, that
I
just
think,
seems
I
a
think
little
what
weird.
he's, like, I think it's, the data won't be any different, and the
Yeah.
goals won't be any different. We're just the form in which we're giving feedback, because the instrument before just was like, here are the goals,
Yeah.
here were the results, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so I think what you all are both saying is like, and we can use it as a test run, not a test run, but like it's still
Yeah.
feedback.
Yeah.
But, you know, like, there's not much evaluation we can do and accountability that we can hold Dr. Fields. It's more, we can treat it as a forward-looking evaluation, if that makes sense. Like, here's where we are, looking forward, here's the feedback we're giving you for the upcoming year. And if there are pieces of it that we do feel like he's accountable to, then we can do that, but.
And then this October, doing is formative. We're gonna have to with the instrument we have.
I was looking at next October, looking
Well,
at
we gotta do one
April.
for this rating cycle.
We don't have to do any
Should do.
formatives,
We would,
like,
we just do a summative in January. We just,
So we're not gonna give him any feedback between now and January.
I
I'm just saying, I think he wants some feedback, right?
Well, but
I mean,
it doesn't
to
have-
sit down till January, yeah.
It doesn't have to be in the formative sense. What I heard was when we deliver those monthly presentations in closed session, I would get monthly feedback on what you heard in those presentations.
Okay, so we can
Those
start
would continue.
Doing that
But
monthly
I
then?
think what they're saying is if we do a formative in October, then that's kind I don't want to get into what
And
you
that's
guys
not
are
really
thinking.
appropriate to do a summative in
Exactly.
January.
Right.
Yeah.
and the thing is, we still have to affirm our
Close it.
instrument.
mhm.
We still have to affirm our goals, which we're gonna be doing this in October. We can't
Yeah.
give him a, I mean, so we'll be talking about it,
Yeah.
but we won't be giving him
Well,
any.
that's what formative is just informal talking anyway.
Right.
That's all a formative is.
So when we're
On the
meeting
agenda
to,
is.
with our facilitator to kind of hone in on all this, we'll be talking about it anyway.
Okay.
So there will be opportunity for feedback during those conversations.
Okay, I just wanna make sure we all when is he gonna give feedback between today and January? And how are we gonna do that for this cycle? Are we gonna do that monthly? Are we gonna add
Monthly
that to
in
the
the
closed
progress
session
monitoring.
of every agenda now between now and January and do it monthly for now?
I
We
said
just gotta make sure it's an agenda item then.
How have
Just
we
needs to
done
be
the
a standing
monitoring
closed
reports?
session.
in the progress monitoring, we've always put this on in the superintendent's reports as part of the progress monitoring presentations.
But we've never put it in closed session to give you feedback.
No, but he said, I thought I heard earlier that that could be a standing thing
Closed
on
session.
the closed session
We
item.
can add that. Yeah, we can add that as a
Yeah.
But
closed session.
after you hear that
Oh
presentation.
yeah, Tasby said there are places that do it monthly. They just
Right.
talk about it every
Yeah.
month.
And I think that could be a great way of coaching you through like the new,
Just the
the
next 4
beginning.
or 5 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
6 months later, but you know.
I appreciate it.
Okay, so we'll do it that way
Okay.
through January, and then we're gonna switch to a quarterly, very informal, and then at the 6 months, a little more formal, not really,
No,
and another quarterly.
It'll be,
I think it should.
it'll be January summative,
Some of it, yeah,
April formative, June, July
a little
formative,
more formal, yep,
October formative,
yep,
and then January
some
summative.
summative again, okay.
But
Everybody,
also keeping those monthly closed session to
Correct.
give feedback on the monitoring calendar stuff.
Okay.
So you're gonna get double dipped.
I
You're gonna get it
appreciate
monthly
that.
and quarterly.
okay,
Well,
Yeah,
I guess
that's
I
not
wouldn't
bad.
expect that to be a long discussion, especially, I mean, unless there's something major that happens.
Yeah,
Well,
I would
yeah.
imagine it's
Yeah.
just.
The more
Yeah.
frequently we do it, the
Yeah,
less
there is
time
to
it
say.
takes.
Right.
and once you get through the first year, like,
Well,
And then maybe we
Start
drop
rolling,
that,
yeah.
kind of thing, but yeah.
well, then we'll move forward from the time aside. We had the instrument discussion, we had the timeline, we had the facilitator, all on the checklist. Now we can talk a little bit more about goals. We already are aware of the goals that are set for the superintendent, our board goals that we ended up addressing with our facilitator. So now what I wanted to do is start talking in a brainstorming sense about what other goals. And Ms. Faulkner did very well to kind of talk through about what some of these other goals would look like in her mind and elements of board governance in which we're involved in that would then be a potential for evaluating the superintendent. So because of that wonderful input, Ms. Faulkner, I'm going to start with you about additional goals that you're considering for superintendent evaluation.
All right, so for sure, facilities, meaning facilities, just, the TASB,
And I'll just, since we're talking facilities, let's just back that down. SMART goals or measurable goals, what
Right.
would be your vision of what we would measure in terms of facilities?
I'm trying to find, you put me on the spot here.
I think,
I
so
thought we
this
were doing
is
this
where I
with a
thought we would
facilitator.
have a facilitator,
Yeah.
getting into this
Yeah.
part.
because I'm not,
I think
Well,
we can talk about general.
General, I want general.
Come to consensus on
Yes.
which
yes,
goals we
that's-
want,
Yeah,
and then, but I think I heard somebody say earlier that facilities would include bond,
yes,
and that I think is a priority for the board, so directing that facilities SMART goal in that direction.
well, and that's just the frame of mind, since we're putting these objectives out or these
Right.
goals, make sure they are measurable in that respect. But yes, this is to be general, we're not gonna take a deep
Well,
dive.
we can't do the
into-
SMART goal, that
Yeah,
takes a lot of work.
yeah, it's a deep dive, but I want
more food.
the thought process behind when a goal is up, what is the measurability on it? And, so anyway, Ms. Faulkner, did you have any other ones you wanted to add?
So, I mean, the areas, the general areas would be educational leadership, which encompasses student services, staff development. It also includes your student achievement goals. And then you have district management, and under that would be your facilities, your operations, your fiscal management, human resources, and then board and community relations would be, the board process itself as related to the superintendent, and then community relations.
Where did you pull this information from?
That's
TASB.
all on the TASB instrument.
Okay.
Yeah, she was just
I
reading it.
wasn't sure if it was our own website, but I
Yeah.
know this is out there for sure.
No,
Well, then, well, thank
I
you.
Googled it because like I said, it wouldn't let me in, it doesn't recognize me
Yeah.
yet, so I'm like.
And it's on TASB's public website.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
where I pulled it up
Yeah.
right now.
Well, Ms. Rodriguez, I'll start with you. Any other ideas or thoughts about goals?
I would, my preference is that we do not stray from what's here, because I think then we're like getting into.
Even for forward thinking, for future?
Yes, yeah. So the things that she read are the ones that are suggested on the TASB instrument as like a menu of choice is how I read this. And yeah, I have nothing that I would add beyond that. I think that's great.
I think we need to do and this may happen with the consultant, a deeper dive on those, because they're very broad.
Yeah.
And so I want to be sure that we give specific, right, specific, measurable, all that smart kind of thing. So, I mean, if we talk about community relations, that's got to be much more narrow.
Yeah, of
So,
course, yeah.
And so maybe we prioritize in those areas, and that may be something we all go back and think about and come back with another short little meeting and say, these are the goals we want, so we can ship that to a consultant
And then
to help us
it's
workshop
in
it.
here, I just went broadly.
Yes.
It
Yeah,
goes
yeah,
very
that's what I'm saying,
clear
yeah.
And
So,
what examples would be
For me,
required.
finance is important. I mean, you know, it doesn't look like we're getting any more money, so how are we gonna do with what we do? So something kind of around finance and budget and that kind of thing, and I haven't worked on that one exactly. So I could see something with facilities related to the bond, something with finance related to budget. And those are two that come to me that aren't really addressed in what we already have.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Eaton, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about our board member teams. You know how we, one or two board members, like somebody's on finance, somebody's on
You talk about committees.
our committees, right?
Yeah.
And then they usually come back and report to the board at the board meeting that, you know, they went to the committee meeting and give a summative, discussion about what was done. We gotta set our committees up.
Yeah, we have them set
But I
up.
mean, we have new board members.
We did that.
We did that 2 meetings ago.
Oh, that might have been the one where you were absent, I
I
think.
wasn't there, because I'm not on them, so
We'll fix that, Debbie. We'll fix that. So,
But other than that,
yes.
again, I didn't look at the TASB
Mhm.
one because I wasn't made
Right.
aware that we were gonna discuss it.
Sure.
And as far as ours is, it's fine.
All right.
We just need to tweak it.
One thing that I'll mention in terms of goals, and I know that we've talked a little bit about enrollment, but I say that maybe not now, but just to get you to think through this. There are districts that are suffering from lower enrollment. There are challenges that are happening in San Antonio and across the state. So ensuring that we have sort of a strategy that may be part of a superintendent objective in enrollment may be something to consider, because obviously we want to make sure we maintain our enrollment and that we are aware of where we're expecting our enrollment to be as we plan and strategize things. I do not want to be the district that's having to face declining enrollment like some of our districts are. And so naturally that may be something to add in terms of the superintendent's eval and how he's managing through that. So just put it out there as a brainstorm, but just a thought. Ms. Stanford.
Just some real specific areas I had made a note of was teacher retention. So I'm sure they fit in some of those broader goals. And classroom management discipline. I hear a lot of feedback on those issues. And then I also added customer service. So the relationship between the community and staff when they interface with school receptionists, principals, APs, just how is that going? So where that would fit into the broad spectrum, I'm sure there's places those tuck in, but those are three specific, other than academics, that I made note of.
Ms. Ryan. I was.
I think the challenge is, I think these are great student outcome goals that we made for our district, and everybody analyzed data really good, figured out a lot of math and a lot of numbers, you know, I love my math and my numbers type thing, but I'm concerned about the district overarching goals, and I'm concerned that 4 of the 8 members of the team of 8 weren't here for any of this. You know, we have, you know, a new superintendent and 3 new board members, and what the direction, I think we're already feeling that some of the direction of the district and some of the priorities are starting to change because we just kind of have some new faces from the superintendent on, you know, including the board, is that kind of a relook of those district goals with the new team to see what else other than great STAR scores and CCMR could help prioritize things within the district. Because again, there's 150 things to do. We can't do all of them all at once, and we don't have the money or the time to do those. And I feel like we dance around a lot of those priorities. You know, we talk about we're gonna go get audits and we're gonna economize where we're spending money and staffing, and we're talking about those, but until you make them a district goal and a district priority, that doesn't send the clear enough message to the superintendent that this is where our priorities are and this is what we're trying to get to as a district. So, you know, if we're gonna sit down with a consultant and do this, having the superintendent be part of revisiting the district goals and then ensuring that his superintendent goals for the next year are nested within those district goals. Like, that's the way the process is supposed to work. So we're gonna try and cram some superintendent goals into some district goals he wasn't even part of making, and 3 of us weren't, board members weren't part of making. It's a little harder to get just full commitment out of everybody because we're kind of walking into things. And I think most of us are fine with right now because it's what we have. But if we can take the time to do this together and make what we already have better and more focused and all of us be fully committed to it, then I think we'll all be rowing hopefully the same direction and everybody will know kind of what they're supposed to be doing. Because yeah, I'd like to see some more economy resource priorities. I'd like to see counseling and career planning as a whole, not just a CCMR number. Because we're about more than drill and kill on STAR and checking some box on CCMR. You know, it's about producing amazing kids that are going to be off doing things and healthy and happy, and you know, all of that. I think there's more than just a test number, and I'm not sure if all of these reflect that our community wants kids that are more than just a test number. And I think that's the message I kind of want to send by just relooking a few of the goals, tweaking them a little bit.
Well, I will say that, you know, we will also evaluate our district goals. So obviously alignment is there. There is opportunity for us to evaluate where we want to go.
Yeah.
Our job is to also set the vision for this district and community, so that falls right aligned to continuing that work. I'll wrap up my thought on a couple of other items in terms of goals. There are things like bullying that come to mind, and student discipline issues and things like that maybe, I mean, we'll have to, when we talk to the facilitator, we don't want to be in the weeds, but certainly that has a concern for me, and I certainly want to ensure that our superintendent is evaluating those things as well. So again, just a brainstorm idea, but an idea is that we are looking at that, and that's important to me. We even have data that will show how many of our students are, you know, involved with Bear County. They have so there are all kinds of data out there that will give us information on what maybe the social emotional aspect of where our students are and what we need to help reach them. So I'm confident in that. And the interesting thing about the district goals that you mentioned, Ms. Ryan, I'm hearing the need to be aspirational, and I respect the need for us to be aspirational. You know, Ms. Kanoy and I had a discussion last time that, you know, I wanted to set all the goals to 100%, which wasn't real, right? So I can't set it at 100% as much as I would like to. It's not realistic, and I know that. So
Achievable.
so I understand that, but I still think that shouldn't stop us from having those dreams. And the example I'll give you is that I briefly spent some time on the Alamo College board, and when I was meeting my new board members, I met Mr. Aldrete, and he said, "You realize the Alamo Promise? I brought that idea up, and they laughed me out of the room. Free college for everyone? Oh, get out of here, so you don't know what you're talking about. But somehow, because he was aspirational in trying to get to a point where they could offer tuition-free college, it got there. So unless we're not thinking as a board in an aspirational light, we'll never get there. We have to aim further so that we have an opportunity. So when we talk about district goals, Ms. Ryan, as you mentioned, I'm thinking that that's where we'll be able to find aspirational elements to where we want to be. Because I would like to be the best district in San Antonio, eventually the best district in Texas, but we have to set that realistic
Destination.
and an aspirational goal. So just know that as we mature through this process, I'm thinking about those things. And obviously, Dr. Fields, I want you to come aboard on that aspirational goal with your team and let's figure out how and if we can get there. But if there's nothing left to say,
I'll just add like
Ms.
a
Rodriguez?
small like point.
Sure.
Because I know like board operating procedures and policies are very important to this board. We adopted our board goals and the superintendent constraints and the board constraints into our local policy. And so as it stands, it is policy. And so I think that's further just reiteration that if we're going to change them, we need to make sure we have a consultant who can guide us in adopting new policy if
Sure.
that's the direction we decide to go. I think the other thing is I agree that we should be aspirational. And in holding somebody accountable to an evaluation instrument, it's important to be ambitious and feasible and not only aspirational, because aspirational may never be, it's achievable on such a long time horizon that that's not fair to any person being evaluated on it. So I think there's a both and, right? There's a
Yeah.
spirit of it, and there's the piece where we're saying this is what we're holding somebody accountable to. So that would be the only thing I would add is that we need to be careful that this is in policy.
Understood. Well, thank you.
Mhm.
Are there any final comments?
I'd like to say a few words.
It's in AE local.
Yes, I would also take on the BJCD local with our, if we're gonna do those informal evaluations, we should
Mhm.
solidify that in the superintendent evaluation local policy too.
Dr. Fields, you have the floor.
One of the other things that's gonna be really huge in the next couple of years is the attendance line. So as you guys sit and discuss, I mean, we need to really start focusing on that, how we're gonna deliver that, be ready for the opening in fall of 2025. I believe the constraints are part of the evaluation, as Ms. Rodriguez put in. You'll find a lot of teacher retention and stuff like that. Ms.
Some of,
Stanford,
yeah. some of it
in the
is in there.
constraints and not necessarily in the actual superintendent goal. And then when it comes to enrollment, I hear you. We don't want to go down in our enrollment, but we don't want to increase our enrollment with issues or.
Things that aren't sustainable.
Exactly, exactly, because we just came out of that, to the tune of almost 900 students. So I really like where you guys are going with this. I can tell you as the team, we would appreciate any feedback that we can get as frequently as we can get it. So thank you guys so much. That's it.
So next steps, then, we're looking at,
The next step that we have, we're going to be,
find a consultant.
affirm the timeline, which we've already affirmed the timeline. We're going to be looking in October to have a special meeting. So we'll have a special meeting, we've identified a consultant to take that next step with us. So those are the two steps. So if we are successful in October with that, we can actually just move forward with our instruments. But I'm going to give October, November, so that we're not rushing. We don't have to rush. We have that legal, that ability.
Hammering out the SMART goals and whatever, it
Yeah.
can take time.
It can, and so I want to make sure that we have ample time to do that. So the
Do you
goal.
think we can have consultant names by the September board meeting so we can decide as a
I
group
think
which
so.
consultant to go with?
I
You've
think
got 2.5 weeks, 2
so.
weeks.
I think we can, and I
Okay.
think it might actually be,
Agenda.
okay. Okay.
Is the person we have before one that you would want to?
I'm,
We'll put
yeah,
something together.
yeah,
We'll
please,
have
please
options.
put something
Look at
together,
all
give us some
options.
options.
All options.
So, yes, back to your question, in terms of that, that's a timeline for us to
SMART
take.
is all done.
Yeah, so that's the direction we'll go. The instrument itself, we've already decided we want to look more at the TASB instrument, so that's already done, in my opinion. So,
Can I make a recommendation that perhaps we plan for a Saturday?
okay,
For that, just because, I know,
I know.
but just because
After soccer.
building goals takes time.
Mhm.
And I don't want us to rush through because it's 9:00.
okay.
And, and I hate for anybody to have to give up a Saturday.
I'd rather do Saturday than to be here at 1 o'clock in the
Yeah,
morning.
and that's my concern, because we're gonna have to, come to an agreement on what these extra goals are gonna be. That's a discussion in itself. And then to actually write those goals.
We can start it.
Yeah, we can
And,
do that.
that gives us time there, and I mean, even if we plan till like 2:00, like 8 to 2, and then we could come back another time if needed.
But we can
just kinda keep
are
that
we
in
all
mind.
okay with Saturday?
Yeah, but not
As long as
necessarily
you
8.
clear it ahead of
Yeah.
I'm available no Saturdays in September. I'll
Well, that's
just
why,
let you know.
again,
October I might be okay.
we're talking about,
Not my calendar.
we'll get that going.
And if that doesn't work, it doesn't work.
Yeah,
but,
I mean, obviously, yes.
Yeah, but
I'm
I
just
like
trying to
that
think
idea.
about timing, yeah.
Okay, all right. So that's the next step from this conversation. We've discussed loosely what some of these goals may look like, so we already have an idea. We think about those and then kind of move forward in a conversation when we have our next meeting. So at that, we're done with this particular agenda item, so your staff is.
Anything we have to vote, and nothing we have to vote on, right?
No, there's nothing. No. We're about to go back into closed session. Pursuant to Texas Government Code, Section 551.074, discussion regarding board member duties, roles, and responsibilities. And the time is now 7:44.
We're taking a quick potty break, right?
Yes.
All right. I will race you to one of the 2 stalls.
I'm good. Any questions, you next, no problem.
I didn't put the item
Maybe there's a weird version of it.
Got it.
I don't think it's actually,
or
no,
on
your
my
PDF
laptop.
available? It's
We
actually
have
not.
time.
No, I think that might.
Might be in
Yeah,
there.
I think it's a picture of a
Oh,
photo.
sent me your
So-
receipt.
Yeah, if you could send those in Word, that would be awesome.
Where, do you have it in Word?
I'm sure I do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I got it from
Because
someone.
right now I just put it,
I probably sent it out to y'all that way before, but
I
it
got
was
it
like,
to you in
that
the
was the
weird
most current
PDF,
one, and
so-
it was the one I found right away. I even opened it in the email and clicked on it and everything, and it works.
We're now back in open session. The time is now 9:04 PM. No action or taken in closed session. So I'm now calling you to adjournment at 9:04. Adjourned.
Okay, I had already done it. I had already done it. I had to send it
I
to you.
did.
she already has your receipt?
Yes.
That one is? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, I gotta get home and get it.
So,
I figured out, I sent her up so she could text me from her iPad, so now she's like, what time are you coming home?